Rap at its core is an expression of many connected yet opposing aspects of our society. Indulgent consumerism versus hopeless poverty. Beautiful romance versus emotionless sex. Social harmony versus gang and drug violence. Spiritual awakening versus blind hedonism. All of these and more are central themes in contemporary hip-hop, a genre that exemplifies both complex socio-political commentary, musical experimentation, and entertainment aimed at the lowest common denominator. The only constant factor is the most very basic definition of rapping as a form of music in which rhythmic speech is performed alongside an instrumental accompaniment. And the current dichotomy is rigid, to say the least. Rappers who are too sincere, we call them corny. Rappers who don't say enough, we make fun of them too. But what happens when you can barely understand what the rapper is saying at all? That's where Young Thug comes in, as one of the most bizarre, interesting rappers to ever pick up a mic. He practically invented the current sound of Atlanta hip-hop. He's been featured at some of the biggest art events in the world. He defies all hip-hop norms, wearing a dress for the cover of his Jeffrey album. That same dress ended up in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Thugger is one of the single most influential rappers of the last decade. But despite his high art meets low art aesthetic, despite his reputation as an unpredictable industry renegade who constantly innovates on his own terms, he's not nearly as successful as his peers. His own unoriginal proteges regularly outsell him. Is it mismanagement? Is it a case of being too weird for his own good? Or is Thugger perhaps content to just do his own thing and not worry about the numbers, in the same way he does with his music, creating on his own terms with no regard for the status quo? Let's understand Young Thug. Young Thug, whose real name is Jeffrey Lamar Williams, is only 27 years old. He's younger than his peers like Travis Scott and Quavo. But his career has been both much longer and more packed with content than either of theirs. He released his first mixtape in 2011 at the age of 20. But first, let's jump even further back than that. Jeffrey was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1991, the 10th of 11 children. He was born in Sylvan Hills, a neighborhood located in Atlanta's Zone 3. Atlanta contains 6 zones as part of a police patrol classification system that almost makes Atlanta sound like some dark, rundown metropolis out of a futuristic dystopian film. Of course, it's not actually so bad. Atlanta doesn't hold a candle to the poverty and danger faced by people living in much denser areas up north, like Baltimore or Philadelphia. But Atlanta did experience a kind of musical explosion in the latter half of the 2010s. And the city's almost military-sounding zone system plays a key part in how rappers identify themselves and their communities. Jeffrey is from the same zone as older musicians like Ludacris, 2 Chainz, and Waka Flocka Flame. Younger rappers from the zone include Rich the Kid and Thugger himself. Zone 3 is well known for its heavy trap presence, and many of its musicians came up associating with drug dealers or dealing themselves.
Do what he do. Do what he do, Joe. Do what he do, Joe, when you walk up.
Listen, guys, this is what he does.
Like many of his peers, Jeffrey was heavily affected by an unstable family environment and an insufficient public school system. His mother had difficulty providing for all 11 of her children, and because of their financial troubles, many of her kids turned to crime to get by. Jeffrey saw his older brother get shot before his eyes, and he has another brother who's in jail to this day after being accused of murder. And despite his good grades, Jeffrey was expelled in the 6th grade for breaking a teacher's arm. He later served 4 years in juvenile prison.
So you grew up with rap music. I heard that you had like a big family, a lot of brothers and sisters. How was it when you were a kid?
So hard. It was hard. It was so hard. I don't even gotta talk about it. It was hard.
Yeah.
Struggle.
And so the music helped you to
escape. Yeah.
To escape to that.
Kind of.
What was?
But nah, it don't help me escape because I still didn't escape. I still was there. So it just helped me deal with it. You know, the paper helped me escape. You know what I'm saying?
After getting out of jail, Jeffrey picked up gambling from his brothers. Gambling led to gangs, drugs, and later on, organized crime. At the same time, Jeffrey was also experiencing fatherhood for the first time. His child was born before he was 16, and more would come soon after. It was around this time that Jeffrey recognized his talent for music and decided to start rapping. Rapping is an important part of the Atlanta trap lifestyle. Young men in the ghetto make music to shout out their neighborhood, highlight their hustle, and increase their reputation. And Young Thug was no exception. Where his music now is often boundary-pushing experimental hip-hop, his early work was instead heavily inspired by industry legends like Lil Wayne. It was only after years of work that Thugger discovered his own unique vocal style. Thugger's first mixtape, I Came From Nothing, sets him up as a fast rapper with a crude sense of humor. It couldn't be further from what he's known for now, but honestly, out of all the early mixtapes I've listened to from Kendrick to JID, Thugger's early work is probably the most well put together. Of course, like many artists, his early music has almost nothing in common with his current sound, but it really wasn't that bad. His rapping was fast and technical, and his rhymes were clever, especially for a 20-year-old. I could only tell that he would eventually adopt an expressive sing-song style because I'm here in 2019 looking back at dozens of projects that showcase his evolution. In 2011, there was almost no clue that Thugger's unique, expressive creativity would eventually be known throughout the world. Over the next couple of years, Thugger grew his reputation step by step. He kept releasing music regularly, never taking a break longer than 11 months, and slowly but surely his reputation grew. At first, he made a name for himself in his neighborhood. Then it spread to all of Zone 3. Before long, all of South Atlanta knew his name. And eventually, his songs were picked up by the DJs downtown. Young Thug had joined the highest ranks of Atlanta's street rap community, all while his flows, fashion sense, and persona just kept getting weirder and weirder. Released in 2015, Barter 6 was Thugger's first big commercial project. It was, of course, his 11th mixtape in 4 years, but it was his first to chart on the Billboard Top 200. Nothing about the music was crazy different from his previous mixtapes, of course. He had already been developing his signature style for a few records at that point. The production on Barter 6 is cleaner than on previous Young Thug mixtapes, but again, not a huge step forward. The real factor that propelled Young Thug into the mainstream in 2015 was controversy. You see, the mixtape was initially supposed to be called Carter 6, as a parody of Lil Wayne's The Carter series. Of course, Lil Wayne didn't take Thugger's parody very well and immediately initiated legal proceedings to force a name change. Rather than be sued or have to delay the album, Thugger instead renamed it to Barter 6. But of course, the controversy didn't end there. Just days after the release of Barter 6, Young Thug's tour manager was arrested after he fired more than 20 shots into Lil Wayne's tour bus while driving on the highway. Whether or not Young Thug himself was involved in the shooting was never proven, but the manager was sentenced to 10 years for the shooting. Thugger denied having any part, but he did decide to host his first live show promoting Barter 6 in New Orleans, Lil Wayne's hometown. Young Thug released 2 more mixtapes in 2015, one right after the other. Slime Season 1 and Slime Season 2 are still considered by fans to be some of his best work. 2016 was again packed with music. Thugger released 3 commercial mixtapes: I'm Up, Slime Season 3, and perhaps one of his most controversial and iconic works, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, besides being a huge jump for Thugger as an artist, features him posing in a periwinkle dress designed by Alessandro Trincone, an Italian fashion designer whose work focuses on expression unrestricted by gender. The cover art was, of course, hugely controversial. It didn't help his situation when he told GQ that he wears women's clothes 90% of the time, the only exceptions being underwear and t-shirts. The public reaction to this was disappointing, but somehow not that surprising. But controversy aside, in my opinion, Jeffrey is one of the best hip-hop albums of the last decade. The instrumentals are great, and Thugger's vocals are effortlessly smooth. He moves between squeaking like a seal on Riri, crooning incomprehensibly on Harambe, and radio-friendly sing-song rapping on Pick Up the Phone. It's all different, it's all unexpected, but somehow it all worked. And I think the reason why it works is the same reason why the dress on the album cover works, despite receiving resounding hatred from every single hip-hop old head on the internet and his uncle. Jeffrey just doesn't care. One of my favorite interviews with him shows exactly what I mean by this.
Fluently, yeah, I don't write. I ain't ever wrote a rap. Ever. You won't ever see a Young Thug piece of paper from Young Thug with no songs on it. I ain't ever wrote it. I guess I ain't ever have to. I guess I really came from it, the structure. So I guess I ain't have to write about it. Nobody have to write it for me neither. It was just like, play the beat. I'm gonna talk about what happened yesterday. Play the beat, I'm gonna tell you what the fuck gonna happen tomorrow.
And I think above his vocals, above the bizarre, gender-bending visuals, what really makes Young Thug unique is the fact that he just doesn't care. There are a lot of Young Thug clones, and a lot of them are selling way better than he does. From Lil Baby to Gunna to Lil Keed, they all got famous by biting off his vocals, lyrics, and persona. But would any of them ever write an Instagram caption that says "fuck daddy"? Would any of them ever wear a dress for an album cover shoot? Would any of them ever proudly declare their appreciation for women's clothes? No, no, and no. And that's why they sell better than Young Thug. They recreate his style in a domesticated, mass-market way. The sing-song rapping isn't experimental anymore because Young Thug, in a way, blazed the trail that so many rappers are now taking for the sake of easy profit. Thugger's next mixtape after Jeffrey, Beautiful Thugger Girls, took a different approach to his music. Beautiful Thugger Girls was originally marketed as an album, but after it failed to sell more than 40,000 units in the first week, Thugger's label instead changed it to a commercial mixtape. Thugger Girls was a huge departure from Jeffrey's previous work. There are tons of genre crossovers from R&B and dancehall to country, of all things. Thugger's singing is soft and emotional. The instrumentals are often acoustic with trap flavoring. Jeffrey croons, sings, and raps over instrumentals that are both more acoustic and introspective than you'd ever expect Young Thug to be capable of. There are honestly a lot of genuinely introspective moments on Beautiful Thugger Girls, but despite its interesting boundary-pushing qualities as a trap record, it barely sold 30,000 copies in the first week. And that's where we are today. Thugger continues to release interesting music that builds on his previous work, but it's just not reaching as many ears as his peers or his copycats. His 2018 EP On the Run experimented with a number of different styles, and it was honestly an excellent record. But it failed to sell more than 30,000 copies and peaked at just number 17 on Billboard. Ultimately, it's tough to tell if Thugger cares about breaking through into the A-list. He's been on the cusp for years. He said in the past that he wants to be as big as Michael Jackson, and he regularly collaborates with pop megastars like Camila Cabello, Post Malone, and Ariana Grande. He even won a Grammy for songwriting on Childish Gambino's This Is America. Some of his best moments have been features on Travis Scott songs, a rapper who he's been working closely with since the early days of his career. And for a while it looked like Travis and Thugger were going down the same path, straight towards superstardom. Some of the most beloved songs from Travis's early mixtapes and albums were only made possible because of Thugger's unique vocals. But as time passed, Travis's popularity grew and grew, while Thugger's stayed the same. He's yet to drop a project that sells more than 50,000 copies. He's outsold by his own copycats. Despite his cult fanbase, Thugger has been completely unable to reach the mainstream. Some of his fans wish he would find a new release strategy, or maybe even switch management. But in the end, will that really matter when it comes to his legacy? Thugger has already reached artistic heights that most rappers could never even dream of. From serving as a stylist and mentor at New York Fashion Week, to having the gender-bending dress from his Jeffrey album cover featured at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, Thugger has made his mark as an artist. And he did it all while being one of the most eccentric figures in modern hip-hop, making music completely on his own terms with no inhibitions to speak of. Not bad for a kid from a burned out ghetto in South Atlanta.